Hey everyone, I'm Daniel Hoffmanson, Executive Director at One Iowa Action.
And I'm Keenan Crow, Director of Policy and Advocacy at One Iowa Action. And we're here to talk to you today a little bit about the legislature and what's been going on up there. Today is the first funnel, so we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about where some of the bills that we've been watching are and what they do. And then we'll get you some steps that you can take to take action on some of those bills.
Keenan, can you tell us more about what exactly entails Funnel Week?
Yeah. So this is a term that gets tossed around quite a bit. So the legislature has various cutoff points for legislation. The first of those is what's called first funnel. And what first funnel essentially means is that each bill gets introduced into a different chamber, whether it's the Senate or the House. It then gets assigned to a committee, who assigns it to a subcommittee. If it goes through the subcommittee, it goes back to the full committee, and then gets voted out from the full committee to the floor. If a bill hasn't gotten out of its initial committee, so if it was introduced in the Senate, has not gotten out of its Senate committee, or if it was introduced in the House, has not gotten out of its House committee, by today, then those bills die. They have to get out of their initial chamber committee to get through that first funnel process. Now, there is a second funnel coming up. That's going to be on March 16th. It's a similar concept, except if it started in the Senate, it has to be both through a Senate committee and a House committee, or if it started in the House, it has to be through a House committee and a Senate committee. So that's kind of where we're at today with that.
Thank you for the explanation. Well, let's start with some of the bad news. So you've been at the Capitol every day since legislative session has started.
Yes.
One Iowa Action has registered for, against, or undecided on a variety of bills. What were some of the bad things that we want to share with
Yeah,
our
so
constituents?
really the worst news, I think, has been this religious exemption bill that got passed through committee this week. This bill is vague, it's ripe for abuse, and we think it's probably going to open up a legal can of worms in our state. I can't speak to what the intent of the bill is, but I think a lot of folks' understanding of it is that it's much more narrow, that it's intended to let people discriminate in terms of the services that they provide. It may do that. It may do things that are much, much worse, though. It may splay open child labor laws. It may interfere with law enforcement investigations. Some really, really awful stuff in that bill. So that's one that we're really going to be focusing on really closely with our partners. And we have some amazing partners working together with us on this bill. If you go look at the bill sponsors, you're going to see Google, Apple, Microsoft, Principal, Meredith Corporation, a whole bunch of folks that you're not going to see on any of the other bills we're registered on. So.
Awesome.
Yeah. Another one is a response to a Business Leaders in Christ lawsuit against the University of Iowa. For those who don't know, Business Leaders in Christ was an organization at the university. They had a member who wanted to be in leadership who was gay. That didn't jive with their code of conduct for their organization, and so they removed him from that organization, and in response, the university removed them as a registered student organization because they have an anti-discrimination policy, or what we would actually call an all-comers policy, where every student has to be allowed to attend those meetings or to be in leadership. What this bill does is it essentially removes those universities' all-comers policies and opens up the ability for student organizations to still receive student funds that every student pays into, even though some students wouldn't be eligible to attend the events that they paid for. And we think that's wrong, that's unfair. The third and final piece that's kind of rough is the Supreme Court supermajority bill, is what we're calling this. So in Iowa, unlike at the federal level, we only have 7 justices on our Supreme Court, which means you only need 4 to clear a majority and declare something unconstitutional. What this bill does is it tacks it up to 5 Supreme Court justices and makes it a higher bar to clear. Now, that's a real problem because the courts are really our last line of defense for folks' constitutional protections. And if we're making them clear an even higher bar, that could leave some folks unprotected, leave some folks with constitutional violations that go unresolved. And that's a real problem to us.
Wow. Yeah. Well, let's shift gears and talk about some of the good news that we can share with our constituents.
Absolutely. So there was a lot of bad news, but fortunately, there's even more good news, I think. I think we were incredibly successful despite some of the challenges we're still dealing with. A lot of the other bad stuff is dead. It's been eliminated by the funnel. And I will, quick caveat, just because things have been killed off by funnel doesn't mean that people couldn't introduce an amendment to a different bill later on. And so we still have to remain vigilant. Folks still have to pay attention to what's going on at the legislature.
Well, so continue monitoring.
Absolutely. But if they don't clear funnel, that's normally also a pretty good indication of what folks' priorities are at the legislature. And so we can anticipate that hopefully none of these measures will move forward in an amendment. The biggest thing is we had 2 bathroom bills, really horrible, nasty bills. They are both dead. And that is really good news for everybody. We had some school voucher bills out there as well. They would have allowed public money to go to institutions that have specific policies that discriminate against LGBTQ students and staff. They are dead. Both of those are dead. The bill, which would have jeopardized some of the modernizations to our communications of or our communicable diseases statute, has been eliminated. We thought it was going to come back in a committee with an update, but it's gone. All the court nominating commission bills and punishment bills, the ones that would have knocked down the Supreme Court's salary from $170,000 a year to $25,000 a year to punish them for some of the decisions that folks don't agree with. Those are all gone. There were 4 different bills on various different permutations of trying to mess with the composition of the Supreme Court. But those are all gone. Bills restricting access to sex education funds, which is a big priority for us. We want folks to have the information that they need to make responsible decisions. Those have been eliminated. And then a little bit more esoteric, a juvenile shackling bill is dead. So the practice was last year that if a juvenile came to court, they were shackled as a matter of routine. That was the rule rather than exception. We would put children in shackles to take them to court. And then if somebody wanted to request an exception to that rule, they had to kind of fight it out in court and see if they could get the shackles removed. We submitted comment last year when the Supreme Court was going through the rulemaking process and asked them to make that the exception rather than the rule. Essentially, if folks thought that people were a threat, then they could shackle them. Otherwise, no dice. And so there was a bill to reverse that rule that we thought was actually a very good rule. It is also dead now. So all that stuff is great. There are a couple proactive bills which I think are also good. We have some syringe decriminalization bills that will stop the spread of HIV and hepatitis C. That's going to be great. We have some suicide prevention bills that have some promise but aren't yet perfect, and we hope that they'll be worked on before they're actually passed, but I think that they have some real potential. And then we also have a telehealth bill that will increase coverage for rural Iowans because it requires insurers to cover telehealth procedures in the same way that they would cover in-person procedures. So that's kind of the roundup of all the good stuff, because it's much bigger than the bad stuff.
That was a lot. Yes, that's good news for us to share.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to continue to monitor, be at the Capitol every day. What can folks at home do going forward?
Yeah, so anytime that there is an opportunity for folks to have an impact on the process, we issue action alerts. We issue those both through our email system and through social media at our One Iowa Action page. So keep your eyes peeled for those action alerts. I know that there is going to be one for that student-funded discrimination bill coming up in the very near future. As soon as we get a new bill number, that just cleared committee, so it will be renamed, which means we need to wait for that new bill number to get you that action alert. But as soon as that happens, there will be an action alert about that. RFRA, obviously, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, also known as the Religious Exemption Legislation. We are going to have action alerts on that moving forward, and so just keep your eyes peeled to this page.
Awesome. Well, stay tuned, and thank you everyone for tuning in.